Very explosive hearing on Capitol Hill today. Democratic presidential candidate RFK Jr. testified about government censorship, and surprise, surprise, the Democrats on the committee tried to censor him. Can't make it up. Take a look how things went down.
I was the first person censored by as the chairman pointed out, by the Biden administration 2 days after it came into office. This is a letter that many of you signed. Many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. This 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing.
I move that we move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy has repeatedly made despicable anti-Semitic and anti-Asian comments as recently as last week.
To say that I created a film that encourages blacks not to get adequate medical care is just completely abhorrent.
Don't misuse my words.
It's the witness's time. Do not censor the witness.
I'm not censoring the witness. I'm not censoring the witness. He's still talking.
It's my time, and I've given it to the witness. Do not censor him.
I'm not censoring him.
If the views that you and others have applied to me, I've attributed to me, if they were actually true, I can see why I shouldn't be able to testify here today. Those are not true. These are defamations and malignancies that are used to censor me, to prevent people from listening to the actual things that I'm saying.
Wow. As a reminder, we have an exclusive town hall with RFK Jr. next Tuesday night right here in New York City. Tickets are free. Just go to Hannity.com. Here with reaction, he is the chairman of the very important House Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Government and the House Judiciary Committee. Jim Jordan is with us. Congressman, great to have you. All right, it's a hearing on censorship, and Democrats tried to censor their fellow Democrat. Can you explain that, Congressman?
Right.
Can't make that up.
Well, nothing's new, Sean. They've been after this guy since, as he said, and I said in my opening statement, since the second day of the Biden administration. There's an email that goes to Twitter from the White House that says, take down this tweet ASAP. And the tweet is from Robert F. Kennedy. And there's nothing in that tweet that is wrong. Everything is factually accurate. And yet they're trying. In fact, the subject line of the email says, RFK misinformation, but it wasn't misinformation. It was accurate. And frankly, even if it was, the First Amendment protects that as well. So the Democrat Party has now become the party of censorship, the party that doesn't embrace the most important liberty we have, our right to talk, our right to speak, and to speak in a political fashion and not be harassed and targeted for doing so. But they did it to, of all people, the most famous name in Democrat politics for the last three-quarters of a century is the Kennedy name, and they're so committed to this censorship, they're even going after him.
Okay, now, one of the worst examples of real censorship, the FBI, and this goes to the heart of the Judiciary Committee investigation that you are a part of. The FBI has Hunter Biden's very real laptop, and they have it in December 2019. And they authenticated that it was his in March of 2020. And then in the months leading up to the election in 2020, the presidential election, the FBI was meeting weekly with big tech companies. We learned from the July 4th ruling in that case in Missouri. Eric Schmidt was the AG, he's now a senator from Missouri. We learned that the integrity site head at Twitter, guy by the name of Yoel Roth, that he was being told by FBI officials that had the laptop, that verified the authenticity of the laptop, that in fact their company and every other big tech company was being told that they may be victims of misinformation that may be about Joe and Hunter Biden. The FBI also knew that the president's attorney, President Trump's attorney, had a copy of Hunter's laptop, and that would likely be leaked. Lo and behold, the laptop story comes out in the New York Post, and they all censored it. And the American people didn't get to see it, and a lot of polls show it would have had a dramatic, drastic impact on that election.
Yeah, and Sean, what we learned this week is that day that story comes out, Emma Jo Morris, who testified today, was the author of that story in the New York Post. The day that story comes out, the FBI just happens to be meeting with Twitter that same day. And in that meeting, someone from Twitter, we got this from Laura Dimlow, head of the Foreign Influence Task Force at the FBI when we deposed her 3 days ago. That same day, Twitter's meeting with the FBI. Someone from Twitter asked the FBI, is the laptop real? The FBI, some agent answers, yes, it is. And then quickly an FBI lawyer jumps in the conversation and says, no further comment. So they confirmed it, and then they went to no comment. Later that same day, the FBI is also meeting with Facebook. Facebook asked the same question because that day, that was the biggest story. And people were wondering, and these companies were wondering because, as you pointed out, Sean, they'd been prepped to understand a hack and leak operation was coming. It was going to involve Hunter Biden. Here it comes. And they want to know if it's real. The FBI in the meeting with Facebook says no comment. So they will not confirm what they know to be true. In fact, what one agent kind of slipped up, it looks like, and confirmed to Twitter earlier that same day. Important information. Now we know that they knew, the same people who were briefing about this hack and leak thing coming, they knew ahead of time and wouldn't confirm it and allowed the country, in just days before the most important election we have, allowed the country to have that story censored, which is exactly what happened.
Let me go to this other issue and what we now know as it relates to Joe Biden, the president, and that is this FBI informant. Now we know why the DOJ and the FBI didn't want to hand over that 1023 form. Now we know it's in that 1023. Credible source, human source, telling the FBI that, in fact, that in the case of Biden and Burisma, that Hunter Biden, who they thought was dumb, was being paid money because Joe Biden was going to help protect them. Joe Biden brags about protecting Burisma by demanding the investigator, the prosecutor gets fired, he gets fired, Hunter continues to get paid, and the Biden family makes a fortune in the process. What do you call that in Ohio, Congressman? Because I have a word for it here in New York.
Yeah, we call it wrong, and we certainly call it suspicious. And I thought what John Solomon said in your first segment, Sean. Yeah. Well, you can say what you can.
I'll say it in a nice way. That's called a shakedown. That is called influence peddling.
Yeah, but I do think what John Solomon said earlier, Sean, where remember in 2019, this is what they went after President Trump on. It was all about Burisma and the phone call in Ukraine. So when John Solomon said, we got to go back, I lived that. I was in the bunker in the basement with Adam Schiff doing these depositions, defending President Trump because it was so ridiculous. But they attacked President Trump on the very thing they were involved in. So typical of the Democrats, it seems to me. So John Solomon's right. Let's go back and dig into those facts. I think that will be interesting, something I'm going to be doing over the next few weeks.
All right, Jim Jordan, keep up the great work. Important stuff that you guys are doing. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
Well, I tell you what, it's been a day on Capitol Hill. That heated House hearing underway again on the weaponization of government and big tech censorship. President Biden's top challenger on the left, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is a key witness. And it's kind of ironic that Democrats on the committee tried to censor him today about a censorship topic. They wanted to block his testimony because of some controversial comments that were attributed to him. Watch.
Why would the Republican leadership and the committee majority give a hearing and a platform to the witnesses today, specifically to Mr. Kennedy, a man who has recently claimed that COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people, but tells the Black community and myself, a mother of 5 Black children, that I should really be careful and not necessarily have the same safeguards to protect my family, my children, from a virus that has killed millions of people because I'm Black.
I move that we move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy has repeatedly made despicable anti-Semitic and anti-Asian comments as recently as last week.
Okay, so what that means is they wanted to take it out of the public sphere and put it in an executive meeting room where we wouldn't be able to watch what he said. Well, that didn't happen. They tabled that motion. And then RF Kennedy Jr. said this.
If the views that you and others have applied to me, have attributed to me, if they were actually true, I can see why I shouldn't be able to testify here today. Those are not true. These are defamations and malignancies that are used to censor me, to prevent people from listening to the actual things that I'm saying. And I think, Ranking Member, that we should have a real conversation rather than an exchange of ad hominem attacks.
You know, I was thinking today, who would cheer this on? China, because that's how they roll. We're not supposed to roll like that.
Exactly. And what was so interesting to me is he talked about ad hominem attacks there. This entire hearing is Democrats trying to malign, demonize, and push RFK Jr. out of the way. But where did this all begin? Why are we even having this hearing? You go to page, I think it's 8 or 9 of the lawsuit that the judge said, Biden, no, you can't censor people. We're going to stop these meetings from happening. There was a digital director named Clark Humphrey, 3 days into Biden's administration, who sends this email to Twitter. Can we keep an eye out for tweets that fall into this genre? And he sends RFK Jr.'s tweet. Hey, folks, wanted to flag below tweet and wondering if we can get moving on the process of having it removed ASAP. So 3 days in, Biden says, get the RFK Jr. tweet off Twitter. He'd go on to be a political rival.
So, Sean, I try to give people the space and grace to maybe they didn't know that then. Do you think they knew he was coming?
Oh, of course.
Do you think he was that they knew he was going to knock on the door to get into the White House and try and possibly run?
I think they had to. And so here's a Democrat candidate who has 20% of the Democrat primary vote. I mean, he's not a small player. He's a huge player in a race against the president of the United States. Number one, but number two, it's a really good point. He's pushing back on the government using agency to have someone else censor in a censorship game that they can't play themselves. It's fascinating. So I love that the Republicans have given him the platform. And by the way, just a reminder, this is what Democrats used to stand for. This is like old Bill Clinton-esque policies that RFK is talking about. Not this new left-wing leftism, Marxism that's come from the Democrats.
Actually, I think Democrats are very nervous about RFK Jr. And I was looking at a Quinnipiac poll this morning. He's got 14% against an incumbent in the White House, the Democratic Party. That is a big number. That's double digits. But, you know, Hakeem Jeffries, about an hour ago, made these comments that what I think this is where you see how worried they are. Yep. This is Hakeem Jeffries. Robert F. Kennedy is a living, breathing false flag operation. His campaign is being run by right-wing political operatives who have one objective, take down President Joe Biden. You're nervous, aren't you?
Who's the right-wing operative running his campaign? I'd love to know.
Me too.
So, but that's also something similar to what the left is saying about no labels, the third party. Yeah. They don't want any competition whatsoever, no matter where it's coming from Joe Biden. But the one that really hit me today was when they were trying to tear him apart, some of the congressmen and women who were, had their 5 minutes on the clock. And it was brought up that he was racist and that, the Tuskegee Project, that his comments about vaccines would then keep blacks from getting a vaccine. And it was an emotional moment when he said, my family members, remember who his uncle was, JFK, signed the end of the Tuskegee experiments. He goes, I was already born then. I mean, the legacy of the bipartisan victories in this country he's bringing up. He's talking about a time when they all used to get along, and he's talking about his family's sort of place in history. And it pretty much shut the conversation.
Yeah, and it's telling that Democrats would rather attack him personally than actually deal with the substance of the hearing, which was the weaponization of the government against free speech. And it used to be, we don't have to agree with everything that RFK says. We don't have to think that all of his ideas are good. But it used to be that the way that you flesh out the bad ideas is by publicly debunking and debating them. Now, all the Democrats want to do is shut down speech entirely. They don't want to give him a platform. And perhaps it is because they're worried that he poses a significant threat to President Joe Biden.
The collusion is already in the courts, and the Biden administration is already losing in the courts over their attempting to censor social media. So let's talk about facts here versus theatrics.
Yeah. So maybe his rise now in the polls looks like that Jason Aldean song, looks like the Barbie movie. The more you talk about it and put it out there, you're helping them out. Maybe they're nervous about that on the left, too.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.
Fallout today after that explosive testimony from a pair of whistleblowers. And we'll get to that in a moment. Before we go forward with that, Jason, I do want to get your take on what's happening on Capitol Hill. And we will dip back into that meeting momentarily.
First of all, I never thought the Democrats would go after a Kennedy. I never thought I'd see that day. But unbelievable that they would, in literally a hearing about censorship, they would try to censor this witness. That is unbelievable to me. They interrupted him. They wouldn't let him speak. They wanted to move to executive session. They did everything they could to censor a guy who was there to testify about censorship.
Look, not to take us too far into the weeds, but I want to understand. When a Democratic Congresswoman, Stacey Plaskett of the Virgin Islands, says that she wants to take a meeting out of the public eye into an executive forum, what does that mean exactly?
Well, she's a delegate, but she is the ranking member. Executive session is reserved solely for those things that are classified. If you have something that's highly classified or perhaps pornographic to the point of child pornography and those types of things, those two categories would allow you to move to executive session. It's subject to a vote. But what she's really trying to say is she's trying to take his words down. She's trying to censor him before he's even spoken. That's what she's trying to do.
Look, at the end of the day, what people want to know is what these witnesses, and he's on a list of witnesses, have to say about what this current administration is doing to step on free speech. And then what we see is in full display a Democratic Congresswoman, ranking member of this committee, stepping on free speech.
Vicious monsters.
Yeah, she literally is trying to suppress him before he even speaks. And that's what the administration was doing to people like Kennedy, who had 900,000 people on Instagram, and they tried to take down his account. They wouldn't allow him to do this. The core coordination between the administration and these social media companies, that needs to be exposed in its fullest, because they were using the weight of the Department of Justice to lean on these social media companies to encourage them to take down, not something that was against the law, but because they didn't like the political ramifications of what people like Kennedy and others were trying to say. It was mostly on conservatives, but here's a case where they're trying to take Kennedy down, who's asking questions about vaccines. Those were legitimate questions. They should have never been taken down.
All right, I want to move forward because there was some other kind of free speech going on, and this had to do also at a hearing that got heated. Fallout today after yesterday's explosive testimony from a couple of whistleblowers, the two IRS employees, one who says he's identifying as a gay Democrat. So he's saying, I don't have a political dog in this fight, describing in detail how the Biden Justice Department interfered with the Hunter tax investigation at every turn. Democrats in full meltdown mode as they tried to discredit the whistleblowers and shift the focus to former President Trump. Not in the room, not part of the conversation, but they tried anyway.
We can conclude that this Inspector Clouseau-style quest for something that doesn't exist has turned our committee into a theater of the absurd, an exercise in futility and embarrassment.
We are here today because Donald Trump is exerting an influence campaign.
I don't like these attacks on the Department of Justice, the FBI, the IRS, as if they are somehow anti-U.S. agencies. This is ludicrous. Beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life down here. None.
The whistleblowers laid out exactly how Hunter Biden got preferential treatment. Prosecutors deviated from normal procedures and slow-walked the investigation against him. They also estimated that Hunter Biden raked in some $17 million in foreign deals that they know about, and that the IRS wanted to slap him with much more serious charges than he ultimately faced. In key testimony, they said they were blocked from following up on Hunter Biden's WhatsApp messaging that seemed to directly tie Joe Biden to his son's shady deals.
This is another solicitation from Hunter Biden, and he refers to the Bidens, plural, and they're best at doing what the chairman wants. I think that's very concerning to our committee because this is a Chinese Communist Party-owned entity. This is of concern to our national security.
With respect to the WhatsApp messages, it was something we clearly needed to follow up on, and that was really one of the major deviations from, in this case, is that investigators asked, and Special Agent Ziegler asked to follow, to take some investigative steps to review that, and it just simply wasn't supported by the prosecutors. So further delving into what that means, I just simply can't do.
Well, I can promise you we're not going to stop on this committee until we understand what he fully meant by that message to a Chinese Communist Party official.
So, Jason, what do you say about that? The WhatsApp testimony agents not allowed to pursue information on, quote unquote, I'm sitting here with my father, things that would put the two of them in the same room while their business dealings were going on.
So you have credible IRS employees that are following the money. They're looking at, potential crimes in how they dealt with these IRS claims, falsifying records, doing all sorts of things, but they're not allowed to pursue the truth. They were impeded by the FBI, the Department of Justice, and that is the core of this. These people were not allowed to do their jobs. It was an incomplete investigation. You know, Harris, next week, the judge is supposed to consider this plea deal. I don't know how a judge properly rules on a plea deal when you just had congressional testimony from IRS agents saying they were not allowed to complete their investigation. It was purely political, something these people have never seen in their investigative careers, and it directly ties Joe Biden and the Biden family to corruption and money that is flowing from these overseas entities. Remember, they have more than 20 entities, no products, no services, and millions of dollars flowing to the Bidens, and yet these guys couldn't go and pursue it to its fullest.
I mean, and what you're pointing to as well is the fact that if we knew all of this before, would that deal even be in place? The judge could reject it. I've been told by legal experts it would be a rare thing to happen, but we'll cover it and see what that judge does. Real quickly, how exactly do we know was the Biden family protected in the investigation? Who was deeply behind it? What was learned?
I think there were very specific. I think when they talked about, they met with the prosecutors, they were unanimous in their decision that they were making a recommendation to do it. But the very specific testimony that was given previously in transcribed interviews and there at the witnesses table today, when they said you cannot ask questions about Hunter's dad. You can't ask questions about who the big guy is. You can't ask questions about the $10,000. When they can't ask a simple question, and remember, they never got to interview Hunter Biden because Hunter Biden was tipped off. When do you ever hear about the IRS getting thwarted in their ability to actually interview witnesses? They couldn't do that in this case.
Wow, tipped off. And Biden's transition team was tipped off. That's confounding to me, since apparently he didn't know anything about anything. Good to see you. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.
And one of the things that the BBC the organizers said at the beginning is that, you know, this is about saving ourselves, our economic models, because we are, you know, most people look at us and they say CNN and BBC are competitors, but we aren't. The real competition is coming from these thousands of emerging alternative media sites that are eroding trust in the legacy sites and are taking away our business model. And we need to bond together.
I'm Dave Rubin, and joining me today is an environmental lawyer, author, and candidate for President of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Finally, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Dave, thanks for having me. Sorry it took me so long.
No, I'm glad to have you, and with all the media stuff you've been going through over the last couple of weeks, you've given us plenty to talk about. First off, though, you usually do these interviews sitting in your library. Am I getting the special office interview, or what's going on here?
I'm in a hotel room in New York City.
Hotel in New York. I'll take it. All right. So let's dive into it. I thought before we get into some of the specifics and all the media stuff that's been happening and everything else, I was once a Democrat. And when we talk about you on my show, people often ask, Dave, what makes RFK a Democrat at this point? This isn't 1960, 1970, 1980. So I guess that's my first question to you. What sort of lines you up with the modern Democrat Party at this point?
Well, I don't. My loyalty and affiliation and affinity for the Democratic Party is, for the party that I grew up with, and I think, what's happening in the party today is unfortunate. I do believe the party is redeemable ultimately. And I think our country is redeemable. And I think we need both of those things to happen. If you went through a checklist, Dave, of all of the things that my uncle John Kennedy, my father Robert Kennedy believed in, and Edward Kennedy believed in, I would kind of check probably every item on the list. Whereas today, some of the issues that the Democratic Party has embraced are things that I'm uncomfortable with. And I think a lot of people around the country are. And a lot of the traditional base of the Democratic Party, which was working people's unions, American middle class, and now more and more minorities, blacks and Hispanics are moving away from the Democratic Party because they feel like they've been neglected and that the party is not representing their interests anymore or their values.
What do you think the best way to sort of separate what I would consider the old school classical liberals, guys like you and your uncle and your father, from what's going on with the more radical progressive branch?
Well, I just talk. I try not to talk about. I try not to badmouth anybody. I think there's been enough of that in this country, and people are done with it. And we need to find a path back to civility and to end this very, very toxic polarization. So I try not to condemn other people, and I talk about the things that I believe in, which are the traditional values of the Democratic Party. I try to find, and I've always done this, try to identify the values that we have in common rather than focusing on the issues that hold us apart. I spent 35 years as kind of with one of the leading environmental champions in this country, but I was speaking regularly, probably doing 60 big speeches a year to mainly Republican groups, and I was getting standing ovations in most of them because I didn't focus on the issues. There's no such thing as Republican children or Democratic children. We all want a clean environment. And yet it had become a very partisan issue. So I tried to talk about the environment in a way that every American could embrace. And I think most of us, 80% of us, agree on 99% of the issues.
Yeah. Have you been shocked at the way the media has been treating you? Because you've been out there basically talking to everybody, having open conversations. You're talking to people on the right. You're talking to people on the left, and the media has gone after you in an absolutely crazy way. I want to read one headline to you. It's about your wife, who I adore, and we were sort of in similar circles when I lived in LA, and I love Curb. But this headline that I'm sure you saw from the New York Times, Cheryl Hines, the Curb Your Enthusiasm actress, is beloved in Hollywood. Now she's supporting the presidential campaign of her husband, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Is she normalizing his often dangerous ideas? I actually retweeted it, and I asked people to come up with some of your dangerous ideas, and nobody seems to really know what they are, but that doesn't stop the New York Times.
Yeah, and all of my conspiracy theories, as it turns out, have come true. They're no longer theories. They're now proven hypotheses. But You know what I do wonder about it. I was thinking about this morning that because this kind of this hailstorm of negative publicity about me really kind of not. It goes beyond like hit pieces to be just this poisonous vitriol. And that it's coming from all the legacy media, from the Atlantic Monthly, from New York Magazine, New Yorker, from the Washington Post, from the New York Times, from Vanity Fair, Daily Beast, Daily Kos, Rolling Stone, and many, many others. And they all kind of use the same talking points, and they also are not accurate. None of them has really written an accurate. And that's one of the reasons it doesn't trouble me, is because it's just inaccuracies, distortions, mischaracterizations. But one of the things that kind of occurred to me is that there's something bigger at play there than just their kind of hatred of me. I feel like I'm kind of on the spear tip of a war between this declining legacy media and the evolving and emerging new media, the podcasters, all of these alternative news sites. And I'm in a litigation right now against an organization called the TNI, the Trusted News Initiative. The Trusted News Initiative was a conspiracy that was initiated by BBC, where they called together all of the legacy news sites, including API, the Associated Press, Reuters, the UPI, the Washington Post, and many, many others. And they married them to the social media sites, to Microsoft, to Google, Facebook, Twitter, and they all made an agreement with each other that they would censor certain kinds of information. For example, any information about COVID that departed from government orthodoxies, but also information that challenged any kind of political orthodoxies, like any reports on Hunter Biden's laptop, reports about the Ukraine war that were inconsistent with the official U.S. positions. And this was an extraordinary thing. This has never happened before. But we obtained during the litigation the internal communications. And one of the things that the BBC, the organizers, said at the beginning is that, this is about saving ourselves, our economic models, because we are, most people look at us and they say CNN and BBC are competitors, but we aren't. The real competition is coming from these thousands of emerging alternative media sites that are eroding trust in the legacy sites and are taking away our business model. And we need to bond together. And so the way it worked was that they would all identify issues and identify individuals who were saying things that should be censored. They would notify each other of those posts or those articles and of those individuals. They would censor them, and then the social media sites would not allow the sites that printed them on. So if you were, Green Med Info, which is a site that provides wellness information, or Joe Mercola, or one of these sites. These others are Breitbart or somebody who was departing from government orthodoxies, you would find yourself banned on social media. And those sites absolutely require social media for their business models. So if you prevent them from going viral, the way their business model works is they print articles or publish articles that then go viral. That's the only way that they grow, that they earn, that they can earn advertising dollars. So if you cut them off there, and this is what the memo from BBC said, we need to choke off those sites. So they wanted to kill all those sites. And they did it by agreeing on a single narrative, which was the official government narrative, and then censoring or ridiculing, or throttling or shadow banning. anybody who challenged those orthodoxies. So you have the legacy media, which traditionally was functioning as guardians of the First Amendment of free expression. They were, they were supposed to courageously speak truth to power, maintain this posture of fear, skepticism towards big aggregations of power, government, corporations, and they now become the opposite. They become propagandists for the powerful and oppressors of free speech and the enemies of the First Amendment. And that, I find myself, I now see myself as a spear tip of this emerging media, which is in an economic competition, but also kind of an ideological, Armageddon with the old media sites. And, so I'm being championed by Russell Brand and by Joe Rogan and by, Lex Friedman and all of these, kind of alternative media giants in a battle. And I think they see that as well. Russell Brand said to me something about that the other day that set me thinking, about how they need to, those sites really need to understand where we all are in this, where they are in this world of, of disruption of the old business model.
Right, and it's really bizarre because even now when they've been so frequently exposed for the censorship, your interview with my friend Jordan Peterson from about 2 weeks ago was taken down on YouTube, and then they put it up on Rumble, and now you're on Rumble, and they're not censoring anybody. But what do you think about, so what would you do? So if you were president of the United States, what would you do in terms of big tech? Is it breaking them up? Is it regulating them? How do you connect that to what you just described with the legacy media that's offering, that's usually pushing the pressure on big tech to do these things? And then, of course, the connections we now know with the CIA and FBI and everything else.
Yeah, well, more and more, we're beginning to understand, and this, this judicial decision this week by Judge Doge in, in the Missouri and Louisiana attorney general's cases, I think really lays it out that the social media sites were kind of victims as well of the censorship, because they were, and I was, I'm judged, the decision is 155 pages, and it's a decision that forbids the Biden White House from having any contact with social media sites. It's this extraordinary injunction, and I think it's bulletproof. I think that's why he did this, 155-page decision, because he wanted to lay out the evidence. And he talks about the history about how the Biden administration initiated this censorship push, blitzkrieg, and I was the first one that they ordered censored. The Biden administration came into office on January 21st, 2021. On January 23rd, they contacted Facebook. The White House contacted Facebook and asked them to start to remove me. And then 3 weeks later, there was a battle. The people in the White House were threatening Facebook with withdrawal of their Section 230 immunity, which is an existential threat to them. Section 230, of course, is the liability shield, so that, if you defamed, Donald Trump on Facebook and said something that was untrue, that you knew to be untrue, that was scurrilous and very damaging, he can sue you, but he can't sue Facebook. Facebook is supposed to be a neutral platform, and it cannot be sued, and that's called Section 230. Mark Zuckerberg said, if we lose that, it's existential. We cease to exist. And so
right, they would actually have to censor more in that case because they would have more liability, so they'd be basically censoring everybody.
Well, yeah, I mean, they would need to read they would have to have lawyers read every single post and assess it for defamation. There would be no way to do it. It would just collapse. So, and that's what the White House was threatening. If you don't censor these guys, we're going to withdraw your Section 230 immunity. So the White House was strong-arming them in the most powerful way to censor, and then the White House invited in all of these agencies, the really weird agencies like the Census Bureau. I mean, the CIA was involved, the FBI was involved, the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security was involved, but also like the IRS and the Census Bureau and a whole bunch of other agencies were all involved in identifying people that needed to be censored, and the things they were censoring were really crazy. You know, it was the same thing that TNI was censoring, like Hunter Biden's laptop. You weren't allowed to talk about that. Anything to do with the Wuhan lab, you couldn't talk about. But also personal attacks on the president. There was a parody of the president and his wife that they ordered taken down. So this is, you know, really, this is like King George III, you know, back in the Revolution. This is the reason we had the Revolution, was that, and put the First Amendment in place so that the king or the, you know, ruler could not silence critics. Because if government can silence its critics, it has license for any atrocity.
So what would your policy be? Would it be that you'd break up some of these companies, or would it be that you'd be regulating them, or let them collapse?
First of all, on day one, I'm gonna issue executive orders forbidding any federal agency from engaging in censorship activities or recommendations or contacts with these companies regarding posts that they don't like. There's, of course, things that should be removed from the internet, you know, but it's unprotected speech. You know, pedophilia and you know, inciting violence and, you know, those kind of things you can censor without violating the First Amendment, because they're not, we're fraudulent.
Right. They're illegal.
Yeah, they're illegal and they're not protected by the First Amendment. But otherwise, I'm going to order them all. Not only am I going to order them to stop censoring, but I'm going to basically, reinstate the Smith-Mundt Act, which has been effectively just forgotten about and abandoned, that forbids the federal agencies from propagandizing American people. And is just as frightening what's happening now with the, you know, active propaganda by the CIA through all of these legitimate media sites of debates about the Ukraine war and about things that Americans should not be propagandized about. You know, we should know who, you know, I think everybody should be able to talk about these things, but we should know who it is talking. We shouldn't have the CIA running reporters and Rolling Stone and Daily Kos and Daily Beast and telling us, you know, pretending that they're neutral reporters.
How worried are you that what Trump describes as the swamp, or what you're just, you know, the CIA, the three-letter agencies, the deep state, all of this stuff, that going against it and talking about it the way you talk about it, which is somewhat similar to the way Trump talks about it, that it's a machine that is so embedded, or as your uncle used to talk about, that secrecy cannot be a piece of a flourishing democracy. But it's so embedded in everything right now, all of our agencies, all of our institutions, ESG, all of these things, that it actually can't change that much. It would, you know, you can go in and you can do executive actions and all that, but somehow the system, the swamp, just keeps moving forward.
Yeah, I don't believe that. You know, I'm very excited about having an opportunity to fix it. And I think I'm uniquely positioned to do that, because I've spent 40 years suing these agencies and thinking about how do you unravel agency capture. And, you know, I've had suits involving almost all of the major agencies, NIH, CDC, FDA, HHS, and then the Department of Agriculture, because I spent 20 years suing factory farms and you know, big processed food producers, and I saw how that agency has been taken over by industrial agriculture and, you know, has completely drifted away from its mission of protecting small family farmers and providing America a wholesome food supply. I'm involved now with litigation that involves the Department of Transportation. I'm representing 1,000 families in Norfolk Southern spill that, upended their lives. And that spill happened because of agency capture. In many of these agencies, and of course, probably 20% of the 500 environmental cases that I've been involved with have been against EPA, which is captured by the pesticide industry, by the oil and coal industry. When I sued Monsanto, we came across emails, secret emails that Monsanto had exchanged with the head of the pesticide division, a guy called Jess Rowland, who was taking a federal paycheck and supposedly working for the taxpayer, but secretly he was working for Monsanto. And this is the problem, is that most of the people who work at these agencies are well-intentioned individuals. They're patriots, they're good government employees, good public servants. But the people who tend to rise to the top and become the division heads, the branch heads, and of course, the directors of those departments are people who are in the tank with the industry, and they set the tone and they set the agenda for the whole. So I need to go in there and do that. I've spent a lot of my life studying the CIA because my family's 60-year fistfight with that agency. I know how my uncle was going to try to reorganize the agency if he hadn't been killed. I know exactly what my father was going to do with the agency. In fact, he had a long conversation with it a week before he died with Pete Hamill, who's my friend, who's was a reporter who was covering him. And I don't think it's a hard thing to do. You need to get rid of the perverse incentives, these financial entanglements that the agencies have with the industries they're supposed to regulate. You need to move around certain individuals, and you need to put in place really good laws against revolving doors, which is part of the problem. People work for 20 years for the federal government, for one of these agencies, and as soon as their pension vests, they move over to the industry that they've been regulating. And so they want a good job, and a lot of them are the heads of departments now, and they end up doing a bunch of favors for these companies right before they leave. And in order to get the paybacks, and I can give you example after example of that, but we need, right now they just have to wait 12 months. We need a 5-year wait to make sure to get rid of those revolving doors. And, but I think it can be fixed, Dave. I'm very confident. That's something I'm very, very excited about doing. And I'm going to go to the agencies myself. I'm going to go to Bethesda, and I'm going to go, to the EPA, and I'm going to have direct interactions with those agencies and make sure that and to the State Department, which is now run from top to bottom by neocons who are, whose job is to keep us involved in these constant wars. And we need to move those people out. And and reinstall the integrity in those agencies and the public purpose.
So I sense you see a bit of a connection between, say, some of the coverage that you get in places like the New York Times and your criticism of the agencies and things like that. Like, you see this as sort of one insidious web, which I think is deeply also connected to the Democrat Party these days. I mean, the fact that you're polling in some places over 20% right now, and they are making it very, very clear that they're not going to put you on a debate stage. I mean, a lot of Democrats, I think, are not happy about this. I know a lot of Republicans are not happy about it, and they're happy to talk to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things I said in my speech, my announcement speech in Boston, is that the people who are normally put in charge of these agencies, and this was what Trump did too. Trump came in and he promised to drain the swamp, and then, he named me as head of the Vaccine Safety Commission, and I started that function. I met with Fauci, I met with Collins, and was putting together that, project, and then when that news got out, Pfizer gave $1 million contribution to Trump, and and Trump appointed two Pfizer's handpicked candidates, Alex Azar, to run HHS, and Scott Gottlieb, who was a partner of Pfizer, to run FDA. And, Gottlieb came in there, did an $88 billion gift of Operation Warp Speed for Pfizer, and then left to join Pfizer's board and collect his payoff. So, that is the swamp. And people come in wanting to change it, but they get intimidated by these big agencies, and they get frightened because, the agency can hurt you. If you go after that agency, there's a lot of top-level officials in there who can commit all kinds of civil disobediences that will embarrass the president. And so what they do is they appoint somebody who's safe. They look at the agency, they say, I'd like to change that, but I got other agendas. So they leave the whole, instrument of corruption intact, and they appoint somebody who's safe. And that person, Ralph Reed once said to me, the guys who get those jobs are the guys who get the joke.
Right.
What I said in my announcement speech is, I get the joke, but I don't think it's funny.
Right, exactly.
And I'm not safe. No, I'm not. My job is to keep the American people safe. But I'm not going to be safe with the status quo. I'm going to be the worst nightmare for the status quo.
So for all the people that hear you, the independents, what I would say are the remaining sort of old school liberals, and for even some conservatives who are open to a lot of these ideas, and a lot of the stuff you're talking about, it's sort of Trumpian in a certain sense. It's stuff that Tucker Carlson talks about. I want to get to the Ukraine war in a second. But what's the way to get you on that stage so that there can be a debate between you and Joe Biden? Because to me, the difference would be so stark that could start the avalanche. Like, that seems to be the chance. What can you do with the Democrat Party, in essence, is what I'm asking.
I think we need to go the Democratic Party into a debate. I mean, we're at a period in history where, so many Americans no longer believe in the political process. They think it's rigged against them. And, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party ought to be doing their best to showcase gold standard elections and to tell, the American people, democracy counts, your vote counts, your opinion counts. And we're actually going to do retail campaigning. We're going to have debates. We're going to, we're not going to be like the Soviet Union where, where the party would pick the candidate and tell you, here's who you vote for, and there's no real contest going on and no real choice. This is America. We model democracy for the world. We should have a model, a role model election in this country. And, we need to tell Joe Biden, to embrace the ideals that he stood for his whole career and not end his career by, tarring our country with a rigged election. The Democrats.
Are you in any contact with the Democrat Party? I mean, have they specifically said we're not going to? I mean, I'm guessing they don't pick up your calls, right?
No, we're not in contact with them. I mean, they've been very clear that they don't want me in this election. I hear it from people all the time. Why don't you? You could hurt Joe Biden, and get Trump elected. People say that to me a lot. People who are in the party or. I ran into Hillary Clinton at a dinner a couple of weeks ago, and she said something like that to me along those lines. And it's strange because most, I don't think anybody is happy with the choices that Americans are being given right now. And I think, we need some other choices. I'm glad Marianne Williamson is in this race. I hope Gavin Newsom gets into it. I think, we need choices. We can't just have a kabuki theater, democracy. We need a real, we're supposed to be, the Democrats are supposed to be the party of the New Deal, not the party of the rigged deal. And that's.
I have to. My audience will go crazy if I don't say something, though, about Gavin Newsom, because he to me is exactly why I'm no longer a Democrat. The reason I literally fled California because of him, high taxes, endless regulation, lockdowns, keeping his winery open. Like, so I'm with you that you need a diverse, broad coalition of people and different ideas and all that stuff. But that guy, I would be remiss if I did not say that.
But I love that because that's what I want to run. I want to have that discussion with him. I want to sit on a stage and say exactly what you just said, because, you know, we should have the working people involved in this debate. You know, I want people who I don't agree with. And I also want to show that we can have a civil discussion with each other, even though, even though we have these profound disagreements. You know, there's nobody who disagrees more with the way that that Gavin Newsom ran the COVID operation. And, you know, I was in San Francisco this week, and I spent, like, I guess, almost 9 months in San Francisco during the Monsanto trials. So, you know, I got to know the city really well and love the city. And the courthouse is near enough Union Square that I could walk down to Union Square every morning. And you had, you know, Union Square, for people who don't know San Francisco, is like the Fifth Avenue of San Francisco. It's where all the shops, you know, Armani and Nordstrom's and Banana Republic and Gap and all of these, you know, powerful, iconic American corporations. The showcase of American retail might is right there. You know, Levi's and all of the, and it is Fifth Avenue West. And I went down there 3 weeks ago, and every one of those shops is closed, every one of them. And, you know, these are huge buildings and giant malls and retail, and they're just closed. They're boarded up because they let them languish during these lockdowns that just destroyed the city. There's a 30 or 35% vacancy rate. And there's no way that they're, you know, I don't even understand any conception of how they can bring that city back. You know, you need somebody, I don't know, you need some very, very powerful, dynamic character who can come in and convince these retailers that, you know, that the policies are going to change and that they can take a risk on California, on San Francisco again. And that's all Gavin Newsom. And I want to talk to him about that. I want to talk on a stage, you know, about what do you think that's good for America? You know, are you happy?
What do you make of the people that now are refusing to talk to you? Because, look, I'm with you. I would love for you to have that conversation with Newsom. I think he destroyed San Francisco as mayor, as you're pointing out, and then he destroyed the state, in essence, California as governor. But, you know, it's not just him. I mean, you know, Jake Tapper went on CNN, what was it, about 10 days ago, and said he would not have you on the show because of your dangerous misinformation. There was obviously this famous thing with Dr. Peter Hotez on, telling Rogan that he'll no longer do the show, and he won't debate you. By the way, I then had Brett Weinstein and Jay Bhattacharya offer to debate Hotez. He won't debate them either. But this notion that you're out there saying, hey, I'll talk to you guys, and now they've framed you as, oh, he's untouchable, as if something you've said is so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't debate it, it's not science. Let's you know, the science is rooted in reason and logic, and you know, scientists are supposed to be able to subject themselves to the furnace of debate, and, you know, allow their ideas to triumph in the mud, to become annealed in debate, and then to triumph and rise in the marketplace of ideas. And if you can't do that, I mean, they say, well, because I'm a fraud and a quack and a charlatan and all the other, you know, things that they say about me, that, you know, you can't debate somebody like that. Well, that's a bunch of, first of all, you know, I've won hundreds and hundreds of cases by arguing in front of juries. And, you know, with people who, if I was making these kind of, you know, absurd claims, that, you know, if I was the kind of person that was making those kind of claims that were baseless, that the other attorneys in those cases would chew me up and spit me out and humiliate me in front of the jury, because that's what we are trained to do. And so, you know, Hotez told the truth one time with Rogan. 2 or 3 years ago, Rogan said, "Why don't you debate Bobby Kennedy?" And he said, "Well, he's a cunning lawyer, and, you know, I'm not trained with debate." Well, you know, every scientist you look at what Darwin did and what, you know, and even like Archimedes and, you know, all of the Galileo and all these, they had to defend their ideas. I mean, there are forums set up all over the world where scientists get together and, you know, and debate each other. And those debates are vicious, and they're for them, very, very high stakes debate. And they use every trick, but that's part of being a scientist. Is you take your ideas and you give them, and, you know, the way that what I would do with Hotez is I really have a lot of domain knowledge about vaccine studies. You know, I've written books about them, I've assembled them, and so I would, you know, my way of debating would be asking him, showing him the studies and saying, you know, how can you explain this? If what you're saying is true, show me your study. By the way, I've had private debates with Hotez. So I've probably spent, I don't know, 10 or 20 hours with him because a few years ago, somebody asked me, somebody with whom I was very close, told me they were going to come out publicly against me with vaccination, and this person is very wired in at NIH. And I said, before you do that, put me in a room with a guy who knows more about vaccines than anybody in the world, and you listen to me debate them, and then make up your mind about whether or not you want to go public against me. And so he called Francis Collins and Tony Fauci, and they didn't want to do it, but they said the guy to do it is Peter Hotez. So he is their, you know, their champion. He's their Goliath. And so Hotez did a series of phone calls with me and this other individual, and let me just say this, the individual did not come out publicly against me after listening to those debates. But we then had a lot of email exchanges where I would say, show me the study that shows that vaccines don't cause, that any of the vaccines given the first 6 months of life don't cause autism. He ended up sending me 11 studies about the MMR vaccine, which does not fit in that category. And the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy of Sciences, those studies don't exist. I showed him those papers. So, you know, I don't think his fear is that I would say something that was sort of crazy and detached from reality. I think his fear is that I would expose reality.
Right. I mean, that's the point. Like, it's not like you're some random kook on the street. It's like if you were saying crazy things, he should be able to debunk them. Let's hit a couple other topics. The affirmative action decision came out a week or so ago from the Supreme Court. And, you know, I've been on board so much of what you're saying, even though, as I said, I don't consider myself a Democrat. I moved to Florida. It's the first time I've ever registered as a Republican since I've been here in Florida. But I saw your tweet thread about the affirmative action decision, and basically you were against the decision. And I was hoping maybe you could just walk us through the philosophy there.
Yeah, and I understand why people, you know, differ about that with me, and a lot of the people who have supported me on other issues would be disappointed by that. But, you know, that, listen, I grew up in a state that was a Jim Crow state. So when I grew up in Virginia, you know, it was illegal at that time for a black man to marry a white woman. Every aspect of life was governed by considerations of race. You were identified by black on your birth certificate. you were raised in a black neighborhood, you attended black segregated schools, transportation, public parks, everything, every aspect. You were identified by race on your death certificate and buried in a black cemetery. I had there was a guy who worked for my family, and from when I was young, I was going hunting and trapping hawks down in the southern part of Virginia, and he would carry me on those trips. And he had been a World War II vet. He was in the Seabees. He was 6'5", incredibly smart. And when we stopped in restaurants, I would have to go in and buy the food and bring it out so that the two of us could eat it in the car. He asked me one day to accompany him on into the local shoe store because he was not allowed in the shoe store. I had to buy the shoes from him, bring them outside, and he had to try them on the curb. So, when my family was, deeply involved in the civil rights movement, and a lot of people look at affirmative action and say, well, it's been 150 years since the Civil War. Black Americans have had time to recover. But I was, I saw what it was like to be black when I was a kid. I saw that, that all of those higher levels of society were forbidden, right, in my lifetime. And my family was deeply involved in ending that system of Jim Crow. And part of that process was doing something that normally I wouldn't believe in, which is allowing, considerations of race to affect the judgments about who gets these, positions in colleges. But I also know, Dave, that almost all of those colleges already have a system of preference. And the system of preference is for legacies, for people like me who had a grandfather who went to Harvard, a father who went to Harvard, uncles that went there. And so it's much easier for me to get in. But all of those legacies and also the offspring of faculty are given preferences. And if you look at a pie chart for who's in, almost none of those kids are black. So this is kind of a way of counterbalancing that. And it's not, believe me, I have a lot of problems with it too. And let me tell you what the problems are that I see with affirmative action is one, it's just contrary to American values that, that we're a meritocracy. It's an illusion, though, as I say, that we're a meritocracy because there are all these built-in biases and preferences. But also, I think that the bigger problem is what Barack Obama called, the subtle bigotry of low expectations that, people, a black kid in a college, in a good college, that people are looking at that kid and saying, oh, he got in here because he got a preference. And I don't think that's good for America either. So I understand that I think the Supreme Court has made a decision that debate is now over about affirmative action. We're moving on, and we're going to, try to preserve the beachhead that Black Americans got during that period in faculty positions, in business positions, et cetera. But for me, I would say that we probably should have kept it in place for a few more years, but, it's over now.
Right. I get the intentions. Just one more on that. What would you say in that case to the kid, the, say, 16 or 17-year-old Asian kid who, scored perfect on his SATs and had all A's and, he knows he's not getting into Harvard because someone with significantly less grades is going to get in. No one gave that Asian kid anything. He might be second American from South Korea and his parents owned a bodega. That was a lot of kids that I grew up around. I mean, what do you say to that kid? I think that's what the nugget really comes down to here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's not an easy position on any side to take, but as far as that Asian kid goes, there's kids getting into that college because they're good at sports who don't have that kind of academic, discipline or academic performance record. So there's all kinds of biases that get certain people in, it's not a straight meritocracy. There's no college. There are very few colleges in this country. I'm not going to say no. That just look at your GPA and your test scores and say that the top 3,000 kids with the best test scores in the country are the kids that are going to get into this college. All the decisions are dripping with bias of one kind or another. So, and unfortunately, the bias, these studies show that the biases tend to reflect the racial composition of the admissions department. That people tend to favor people who look like them and give them a preference. And, a lot of the admissions departments didn't have black people in them. And so, that's, it's not an easy question, Dave. It's not one that I would, it's one that's inconsistent with a lot of my other values and ideas about the country. But, because of my background I land on that side.
Yeah, I think that's as fair or as honest an answer as you can give. I happen to disagree, but that's just fine. That's the point of all of this.
Yeah.
Let's hit a couple other things. So Ukraine war, there seems to have been this odd flip amongst the parties. When I was growing up, again, as a Democrat in New York, and my family, we all considered ourselves JFK Democrats, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Ed Koch, probably many of the people that you literally grew up around, but that you were your ideological heroes as well. The Democrats were sort of the anti-war party. That was at least the notion. And it was the Republicans and the neocons who then wanted to nation build and all of these things. We seem to have had a flip on that. Now, I get there are plenty of Republicans that are for this Ukraine war as well, but it does seem to be being driven more by the Democrat Party, at least because Biden is in office. What do we do? Well, first off, I guess, do you think that's a fair estimation? And then what do we do about this to get ourselves out of this before World War III comes?
Yeah, and it's getting to a crazy point right now where we're now, the Biden administration a year ago said that when they were called upon to send cluster bombs to Israel, the Biden administration, Jen Psaki, said use of cluster bombs was a war crime.
Yep.
Yesterday, President Biden announced that they're sending cluster bombs to Russia. And meanwhile, they're telling the American people that we're winning the war. Cluster bombs are a last resort weapon. And they're saying they have to send them because they've run out of other weapons. So what is actually happening? Why are we being lied to? Clearly, we're being lied to. But now you have this split. And by the way, the driving force behind wars in this country have been a group of people called the neocons that are embedded in the State Department from the top to the bottom. That's absolutely pervasive in the State Department. And and they were, a lot of them were driven out because after the Iraq War, they published their manifesto in the late 1990s. It was called the Project for a New American Century, and this outlined their plans for the world. And what they said is that America had won the Cold War, and as the victor, it was be our privilege to run the world for at least a century. It would be the American Century, Project for a New American Century. And that we should accomplish this feat through the use of our superior military power and through violence. And it outlined 8 countries that needed to be overthrown, including Iraq. And then shortly after that, publication of that, the neocons in the White House who surrounded President George W. Bush, defrauded us into the Iraq war by saying there were weapons of mass destruction and suggesting, falsely that Saddam had something to do with the 9/11 attack. Now, that war cost us in the end about $8 trillion. We left Iraq worse than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. The country is now an incoherent, battle between Shia and Sunni death squads. We pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran, which is, exactly the foreign policy outcome that we were trying to avoid for 40 years. We created ISIS. We drove 2 million refugees into Europe, which destabilized all the nations in Europe for, the next probably censoring. I mean, what's happening in France with Iraq, with the riots today, is a direct result of our intervention in Iraq and Syria. Brexit, it was an outcome, but it was blowback from our intervention in Iraq and Syria. So we broke apart Europe, and all of those neocons were driven out of office, and we thought they were gone from government forever. They were pariahs, they were in shame, disgrace, and but they reappeared first in the Obama administration, a few of them, and then now they run the Biden administration. Victoria Nuland, Tony Blinken, these are key figures in fact. Victoria Nuland's husband, Robert Kagan, was the author of Project for a New American Century, that PNAC document that I referred to. And they're the ones who have orchestrated this Ukraine war. Their vision was that they've always wanted to dismantle and balkanize Russia and run Russia and be able to devour its natural resources, have U.S. companies in exploiting the oil, et cetera. So they believed that Russia was weak militarily and that Putin was weak. They were mistaken. And they said they felt like if we punished Russia with these draconian sanctions, the economy would implode, it would destabilize the country, they would overthrow Putin, and whoever replaced Putin, no matter if they were more nationalist, more violent, it wouldn't matter because Putin himself was the guy that was holding Russia together. And they had to get rid of him because then with the whole Russian enterprise would fall apart. And they say in Brzezinski's book, et cetera, they say again and again and again, we got to draw Russia into a war like we did in Afghanistan and expose its military. And it's best to draw them to a war against NATO. Because then we can deploy all of NATO forces against them. We can expose the weakness of the Russian army and the Russian state. It will. There'll be an ousting of Putin, et cetera. This was their plan. So, Putin did not want to go into Ukraine. We now know that's clear. He wanted to sign the Minsk Accords. Even when Donbass and Lugansk voted to leave Ukraine, he said no. They voted 90-10 to leave. He said no. You stay part of Ukraine, but let's make a deal to keep to protect you from the violence by the government that the U.S. installed in Ukraine in 2014, and let's keep NATO out of the Ukraine, which was the existential threat that they were most frightened about. The U.S. kept saying we're going to put NATO into the Ukraine. We're going to violate all of our promises not to do that. And then we torpedoed the Minsk Accords. France agreed to it, Germany agreed to it, Russia had agreed to it. Zelensky ran in 2019 saying that he won 70% of the vote. A comedian wins with no political experience. It's like, Dave, if you ran for president promising peace, and because
God help us all,
that you got elected and then you change your mind, right? That's what happened. Something changed his mind. Clearly, he was threatened with murder by nationalists, ultra-nationalists within the Ukrainian government, and threatened with a cutoff by Victoria Nuland, the people, the neocons in the White House and the State Department. So then what we now know is that in April of 2022, they signed a peace agreement modeled on the Minsk Accords. Putin signed it and Zelensky signed it. And the Russians were acting in good faith by withdrawing all their forces from the Ukraine. What happens? The White House sends Boris Johnson over there to torpedo that agreement. So we wanted this war, and we wanted it for something that had nothing to do with the Ukraine. Well, now the neocons are getting cold feet, and there is division within the neocons. And Richard Haas, who's one of the oldest neocons, is now saying, Biden administration sending cluster bombs. They're going to try to let Ukraine into NATO. What's going to happen then?
Right, then we're bound.
Then what will really happen, Dave, is this. We then have to, then NATO is going to throw Russia out of the Ukraine, including Crimea. Russia will never leave. That it would be like us being defeated by Mexico. It's not going to happen. You saw, I mean, you remember what happened to Stalingrad, the sacrifice the Russians were willing to make during World War II. The Russians are unbeatable. They're killing Ukrainians right now at a 7-to-1 ratio. We've killed 350,000 Ukrainians completely unnecessarily. They're butchering. We've turned that country into an abattoir of death for the flower of Ukrainian youth. But now, if we let them into NATO, the defeat that they've now suffered, now all of NATO is going to go in there. But here's what really is going to happen. Many of the NATO countries are going to refuse. Greece will never go to war against Russia.
Right, it'll be us, in essence.
What? And what it will do is it will expose Title V, which is the agreement where they all have, and if one of them goes to war, they all have to go to war.
Mm-hmm.
It will expose that as a paper tiger, and all of NATO then will fall apart. So the neocons in the White House are now divided because some of them, the smarter ones, are terrified that this will be the end of NATO. And so they're now saying, they're now telling President Biden, you can't let Ukraine into NATO, and who knows what he's going to do, because who knows how much of his decision making is actually taking place in Joe Biden's brain, and how much of it is just being told to him, do this, do that, and it's unclear. Because
I would say it's probably very, very little in Joe Biden's brain. So let's just follow up on that, and then I just have one more for you, and then we're good. So what would you do? I mean, so now it's January 25. What are you doing on day one to make sure that this thing doesn't escalate?
I'm going to negotiate a peace with Putin. It's our war. It's a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia, and I'll negotiate a peace. Of course, the Ukrainians will be part of that, but let's negotiate a peace. Putin's wanted to negotiate from the beginning. We haven't talked to the Russians for at least 6 months. Why aren't we talking to them every day? And by the way, these neocons like Richard Haas are secretly talking to the Russian leadership because they want to get out of there now. They understand that they made a huge, huge mistake. Right, Putin, by our own, we do polling over there. The U.S. firms do polling, and our government does polling. And those polls are showing an extraordinary popularity. Putin is now stronger than ever. He's got 90% popularity and approval ratings among the Russian people. So, they have not weakened him; they've strengthened him. And the Russian people are resolved, and they are not going to lose this war.
I want to ask you just one other thing, because people have heard you talk about some of the reasons you like Trump and some of the reasons you dislike Trump, and obviously you've laid out here some of your frustrations with Biden and the Democrat Party. But the one other guy that seems to be in the mix here, I don't know that I've heard you talk about at all, actually, is DeSantis. He's a huge reason why I moved my family and 2 companies here to Florida, and I see what the results of governing right are. I see you guys sort of lined up on COVID. I see you kind of lined up on the agencies, certainly on the border. I saw the video you did at our, the wall in Mexico, just watching hundreds of people from, as you said, dozens of countries just walk right through. I'm wondering, do you see any touch points there, and what maybe are the chasms there that I'm not seeing?
Well, I thought what he did during COVID was really, real leadership. He broke with the dominant theology, and he did exactly what a leader should do. Is he contacted the best scientists in the world. The scientists from Stanford, from Harvard, from Oxford. He flew them into Florida and had them sit down and say, what actually should we be doing? And, he asked the right questions, and I think, Florida ended up with a much better record than any of the other states, even though Florida has this population, the most vulnerable population, because it has a lot of seniors, a disproportionate number of seniors in Florida, and yet they still did a lot better than, particularly comparable states, high states like California. with many fewer seniors. And so I thought he did really well in that. I don't know. I feel like some of the stuff that he's done since then have kind of a mean side to it, and which I don't like. That it feels like bullying. But I don't know. I mean, I've met with him twice, and both of our meetings were very, very friendly. And I really, really like his wife, Casey. I think she's fantastic. And so, I guess things to think about and more to be seen.
Robert, I will leave you with this because I say it on the show whenever we play your clips, that if the Democrats will not put you on that debate stage, I don't know if it's too late, but I have a feeling that the Republicans would. So either way, I wish you a lot of luck, and I thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks so much for having me.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of mindless drivel, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.